Oh, I love the smell. Look at how nice and old, like.
This was all beadboard.
Right.
And a lot of the beadboard was damaged. In here, they put wallpaper on it. And if you can imagine wallpaper over top of this, all these lines showed in it. And it was dark red, so it made the wall, made the hallway look about this
It's
wide.
still beadboard. Somebody just turned it up on its side.
Well, yeah, they just turn it. I mean,
Okay.
you'll see it in different places here. Sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's this way. Okay.
Right.
I've portrayed Robert E. Lee for the last 25 years.
What's your name?
Al Stone.
Al. I'm Derek.
Yeah, Derek.
Well, you know Jeremy.
This photograph right here came out of Lee Chapel, which is where Robert E. Lee is buried. And in 2002, they were selling some stuff to raise some funds to help do some renovations and restoration work. And so that came up for sale, and I heard about it, and she bought it, and she gave it to me, and she said, "Now this is your anniversary, birthday, wedding, everything else for the rest of your life. Don't expect another thing." So that's kind of the story of that. And then over here is me. There was a picture, taken at Avenel Plantation up in Virginia. And I was looking out the window, and the guy took the picture and he painted that in pastel colors. And then here's a different artist, and this is done in charcoal here. And then there's some, like there's a kind of a mold of Leon Traveler there. Another one, this one was taken in spring of '64. I mean, it depicts a
So cool.
thing that happened in 1864.
And where do you do your reenactments?
I did them wherever Robert E. Lee was, and a lot of places where he wasn't. And then this story here, Robert E. Lee married the great-granddaughter of George Washington. Martha Washington was a Custis, Martha Custis. And when her husband died, she married George Washington, and she had two children. One of their children sired this guy, and this guy sired Mary Custis, who Robert E. Lee married. So it tied the Washingtons and the Custises and a whole lot of other prominent Virginia families together, okay? So that's kind of what this is. My wife was out at a yard sale one time
And where were you born?
in upstate New York,
Okay. Like Albany. I'm a Vermonter, so I'm Vermont Derek,
Elmira.
which is on the border, like Champlain, Lake Champlain?
More toward where the Finger Lakes area is.
Oh, yeah, the Five Finger Lakes, yeah.
Mohawk Valley, yeah.
Okay.
I was born in Elmira, which is the south end of Seneca Lake, just right on the Pennsylvania
Okay.
border.
I've been by the lakes many, many times.
This is an interesting map here. It's a 1783 map. And this was right after the French and Indian War in the 1750s and 60s, and we got France. France gave us, England had all this territory from here over.
Right.
And then France owned from the mountains this way. Well, after the French and Indian War, they ceded all this territory to England. So now Connecticut that starts here is broken.
Now, what was the date on that war again? Say that.
Well, the war itself was in 1750s and in the early 1760s.
Okay, so as a Vermonter, the Revolutionary War started 1780.
After that.
Yeah. So,
After that.
guys, look at this map right here. Look at how it's divided. Like, that's South Carolina. This is amazing. Like
And all
North
these
Carolina,
states,
South Carolina.
all these states ended in Mississippi. Connecticut started here, broke up a little bit by New York and Pennsylvania, and then picked up again. Connecticut goes over to the Mississippi River.
Right.
And let's see, all this was all New Hampshire. There was no Vermont at that time.
Right. Quebec too owned a
Hampshire.
lot of stuff too, right? Like Montreal. Like well, I'd say Quebec, Montreal, but I know that Canada was involved in that as well.
Yeah, there was a lot of border exchanges up in through here.
Okay.
In here, but at the time that this map was drawn, there was no Vermont. That was,
Right.
It was you had.
Yeah, I can see the shape in my mind because I can see the Green Mountains clearly, right? So yeah, that's spectacular.
Yeah.
That's a great map to have right
Yeah,
there.
it really is. And then this breaks it all down as to the growth of the United States. And I went to an event one time, and on a Friday night I checked in and met a lady. And on Sunday when I got ready to leave, she gave me this, and this is where Robert E. Lee was born, Stratford Hall, over in Virginia on the Potomac River. And that's Arlington, where he married Mr. Custis' daughter. He got married there at Arlington, and that became his home. Until after when the war came, the Yankees came and took that. And then after the war, he stayed at 707 East Franklin Street for a few months. And then he ended up at Washington, which is now Washington and Lee University, which at that time was called Washington College. And that's the president's house at Washington College. And then there's Lee Chapel at Washington College where he's buried, so she gave me that.
Right, that's spectacular.
And this document here, this is a fax copy of an insurance policy that Robert E. Lee took out on October the 17th, 1859. Now, most people, they would just skip right over that and not think a thing about it. But on October the 17th, 1859, John Brown came into Harper's Ferry and took charge of the arsenal. And Lee was called upon to take a small contingent of Marines and go to Harper's Ferry and quell the disturbance. Okay, in fact, the note that he got said there's some sort of an insurrection taking place at Harper's Ferry, and you are to be dispatched immediately and go to Harper's Ferry. Well, I think between the time that he got that note and the time he left, which was late in the day, he took out insurance on Arlington because all of a sudden he realized the war is at our doorstep right now, October the 17th, and that's what I think is. And it lists the buildings at Arlington and the value of them and so on. And so,
Very cool. That's a very cool document.
this right here is a copy of a letter that he signed that he wrote to after the war, and this would have been in August of 1865. He's in Powhatan County at a little place called Derwent, where he stayed for a couple months. And he had been offered the job as president of Washington College, and he said, "No, I don't think you want me because I just lost the war." And they said, "We want you because people in the South worship you." So he basically, okay. So he wrote this letter, and then that's the letter of acceptance, and that's a copy of that letter. Is what that is. Okay.
Very cool.
In here, this is the Lee room. Okay. This is dedicated to the war and Robert E. Lee and my impression of Robert E. Lee.
Guys, I'm gonna find one of those one day in a river.
That's an original 1861 Sharps.
Oh my
No,
goodness.
Spencer. That's a Spencer repeater. And it would take shells like this right here. This would have a projectile sticking out of it, and you load them in through the stock, through the stock. The part that
Guys,
goes
this
up
is like
against
the modern gun of the day for real.
You load 7 back in the stock in the handle stock. It's called a stock, and then push the lever down, and the lever would bring one up in. But you still had to put a percussion cap right underneath the hammer. You had to put a percussion cap there. The hammer would come down, hit the cap, and the cap would strike the
Did it have a spring-load eject? Was there some sort of
spring
spring?
through the back.
Oh,
where the
okay.
hole. That's where the bullets go in there.
Right.
And there's a spring on there that pushes it forward. And when you push the lever down, okay, when you push the lever down, that brings one forward, throws it in the chamber, and then you pull the hammer back, put a percussion cap on the nipple, and then you're ready to fire. But you got to have it won't fire. There's no place here that's got the charge to ignite it with.
Right.
The charge that ignites it and sends it.
Well, if we find any of those in your yard, I'll make sure that I drop them off into your collection. How about that?
That'll work fine. And that's portrait of an artist by the name of Brad Schmel that did of me. And here's another one that he did of me. And I posed for that one. In fact, I was sitting on a 55-gallon barrel, and he used me for the model in that one. And that was that depicts a time when we were on our way to Gettysburg in 1863, June 22nd, 1863. And that's in Berryville, Virginia. And I've been there. In fact, the day that Mort Kunstler released this painting, I was there with him, and the crowd came out the courthouse door and down through like this, and I was working the crowd while he was inside signing it. And that's print number 4.
What about this? This is
That's a replica of the sword that Robert E. Lee carried. It's an 1852 field officer's saber. And
that's like the quality. That's what it looked like when they got it.
That's what it would have looked like brand new. Yes.
Wow, guys!
It didn't have any of this on it because it was a U.S. sword.
Right, and can you imagine running that through somebody because you had to stab somebody or something crazy like that, guys?
Hold on just a second.
I mean, that wasn't just something to wear, guys. That was something that you actually had to use. You had to like swipe down.
That's a 36-inch sword right there.
You had to swipe down from your horse or whatever. You had to.
This is a 46-inch.
So he said that was a 36-inch?
That's 36.
And this is the 46.
This is what they call a wrist breaker. And the reason for that is because you got to have it on a belt on your, okay?
Right.
And this is so long that it drags the ground. For somebody like me, it would drag the ground.
Right. How tall was Robert?
When you go to pull it 5'10".
So you're similar height, as a matter of fact. Okay.
So when you go to pull it out, you got to keep on pulling because it's so long.
Right.
Okay. It's
crazy.
You can see how long it is compared
yeah.
to and that's what they call a wrist breaker.
Spectacular.
Yeah. And that's an 1862 Millard sword. It was made. There were 10,000 of those made by the Millard Company in New York City.
And that's an actual original, right?
This is the original.
That's beautiful.
As is this.
Right.
That's an original. And this is just a presentation sword, like what the cadets would use at West Point.
Right.
The presentation sword.
What an honor, guys. I feel so blessed.
And here, these are, I tried to retire my presentation position as Robert E. Lee in 2015 after Appomattox.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a big ceremony for me, and this was a gift that was given there. This was a gift that was given to me there. These are a pair of gauntlets that I used for years, and they had taken those and put them on here. And there's a picture of me at Appomattox after I retired the troops. This is a scene from the History Channel documentary, April 1865, The Month That Saved America. And that's me in a smoke-filled area on my way to Appomattox to meet with General Grant. That picture right there was taken at Appomattox, 150 Appomattox. And that's another artist rendition of me up there. And another artist rendition of me up there. In fact, when the lady drew that one, she took several pictures of me in her studio. And then I left. But before I left, she said, would you just sit and pose for me for a few minutes so that I can, I've got to get the colors and the just different detail of your uniform because you're going to be gone and I've got to draw this thing. It'll take me months to draw. And I said, okay. So I sat on a stool kind of like this and was just sitting there talking to her. After about 15 minutes, I said, are you painting an actual picture of me? And she said, yeah, I've got to do that, to make certain I've got the detail right. And I said, so what are you going to do with that picture that you're painting? What are you going to do with it when you get through? And she said, I'm just going to throw it away. It's work products. And I said, why don't you just give that to me? So.
No way. Look at what he's pulling out. Like a hidden piece of.
This is the work product, and I probably treasure this more than I do that. That's print number one.
I'm excited to see that.
And the reason is because, you know, back in the old days, they didn't have cameras. And if you wanted a portrait, you had to sit for it. So I actually sat for that portrait. Okay. So it has kind of a sentimental story. And you can see her notes on it here, where she made notes on it, and 3 stars and colors and different type of stuff. And then she autographed it for me. That's cool.
And what was her name? Do you remember?
Mary Riley.
Okay.
And she's from Manassas, Virginia. She's got a studio in downtown Manassas, Virginia. And then these pictures up here are just different phases of Robert E. Lee's life. That one right there is probably about 1835, 1836 as a cadet. And here is the superintendent of West Point, 52 to 55. This one was taken in 1864. And this one was taken just a few months before he died in 1870. And then these two, this one and the other one, show the human side, the compassionate side of Robert E. Lee. And that jacket that you're standing in front of there was worn by Robert Duvall in the movie Gods and Generals.
Guys, there's so much information in here that like it's hard for me to comprehend right now. Like, he's just given us a quick tour. I bet we could spend a day in here and have him tell us a story about everything in here, but it's just insane right now. So I'm loving this for sure.
And there's a piece right here that I'm kind of proud of. At the same time that I was trying to retire, there was a Confederate Marine Corps up in Ohio, and I'd done a lot of stuff with them, and so they gave me this as a retirement gift.
Oh my goodness.
And that's a black powder. It actually fires. I've never fired it, but it's designed to fire.
You ever want to fire it? I bet we could arrange for you to fire that.
No, not really. And it was a gift to me as portraying Robert E. Lee. And
that's spectacular right there, guys. Do you see that? Let me take it. That's amazing. I love is this the stuff you normally just drink tea from, or?
No, these are just some pieces that I picked up over the years. And just to give you an idea, I used to go out about 100 times a year to speak as Robert E. Lee and stage presentations and that type of stuff. And I got a lot of unique calls. One time I got a call from William McCraven, who was the commander of the Central Military Force, whatever it was. And he asked me if I would speak to a group of people in Savannah in December of 2011. And I said, yeah, I can do that. My schedule's open. So I went down there, and I really didn't have any idea what it was. He said it's going to be a program on reconciliation and that type of stuff following the war, and how the problems that we had because of Reconstruction. The North imposed Reconstruction on the people of the South, and it was bitter. It made the people of the South really bitter, and that lasted for 100 years, and some say it's still going on. And so my goal was to talk about the effects of Reconstruction and the fact that the North wanted to get even with the South for doing this. When I got there, I found out that there were about 30 or 40 U.S. officers there. And those 30 or 40 U.S. officers were kind of chaperones, if you will, for about 110 dignitaries from other countries, 110 different countries. There were ambassadors and vice presidents of the countries and so on. And these were countries that had experienced civil unrest recently. And I was to speak to them about how bad Reconstruction was on us. So therefore, don't you do it, okay? Take a lesson from both of us. And so I spoke on it, and I got this plaque from that. And
guys, this is also why we should always have history in our education system today.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's
so that we don't repeat history. That's exactly why we used to teach it. That's why we should continue to teach it.
It was the U.S. Special Operations Command. It was the one who put it on, and General Mark Clark was the one that was my immediate contact at the event. But I was originally approached by the man who was Admiral McCraven, William McCraven. So it's been, and I've been up and down the Mississippi River 3 times on that the largest paddle wheel steamboat.
I was just
ever
gonna
built.
wave my hand like this, like a paddle wheel, but absolutely.
Yeah, it's 428 feet long, and then
Must be an amazing sound, just something you could sleep
6
to.
decks.
Yeah,
Got a little
amazing.
swimming pool in it, and 6 different bars, and food everywhere you go.
Yeah, I
all
see
the time,
bars and a
24
lot of
hours a day.
drinking, some gambling at tables. I just see all that. Like,
I
it's
was on there
insane.
with Mark Twain was on there with me, as well as Ulysses Grant. The 3 of us were on those three.
Right. That's
trips. So
that's
we
amazing.
were the main speakers for the thing. So, the guns that you see over there. This one right here is called a Dragoon, and it's a muzzle loader from the 1840s.
Like a packed front loader, muzzle loader kind
Yeah,
of? Okay, very cool.
You pack your powder in, your wadding, and then you put your projectile in on top of it. But you do it to each of these cylinders by itself.
Right, and then it has like a,
And then here's where you're.
that's very cool.
Right in here is where
So you have a
the
repeater
nipple-
fire through a multiple pack. That's awesome.
Well, you've got the
Primer.
primer
Yep.
goes on each nipple. So when you pull it back like this, it hit this hits
Yep.
the primer, the cap,
Very
the
cool.
firing cap. That sets off the spark. Sets a spark that hits the
And
powder.
did they have like a pre-cap? Like they had a cap?
Yeah, it's a little
Okay.
metal cap. It's
Okay.
about as big around.
I'm
as-
familiar with modern firearms, and they still have those pre-caps as well. So
It's about as big around as that right
Yep.
there. Okay.
look, guys, Robert liked the music too. You see all this music in the Robert E. Lee?
This is a unique gun in that the barrel turns here, and it too is a muzzle loader.
Is it something that you had to turn on your own? You just turned it to the next space?
When you pulled the hammer up, okay, well, when you
So it's like a clock. It had its own mechanism to move it. Okay,
you
very
loaded it the same as you would this one right here, okay, and that comes down and it hits the cap. And this is a Philadelphia Derringer, like the one that was used to shoot Lincoln with.
Very cool.
And this was a sharpener that was used by one of my great grandfathers that was in the war.
That's cool.
And
Was he a butcher?
no, he was just a soldier. He was one, I
Oh,
had
and he
two
just
of them.
needed to
I
cut
had
the
two
meat
of
on the
them.
field at the field to keep knives sharp and stuff. So
I
that's
had
very
two
cool.
of them. One was an engineer with the 50th New York Regiment, and the other one was the 49th New York Regiment.
Was this like a field crutch or something that somebody uses?
Yeah, a person up in West Virginia, his grandfather came home on this crutch from
Yeah.
the war. His great grandfather came home.
He had been shot or
And
something?
he gave it, yeah.
Very cool.
And he gave that to me. He said, "Al, you need to have that in your museum."
Yeah.
So I had, when I lived in West Virginia, I had a whole lot more in this. In fact, I had a building. The building was probably 50 feet long, and
Right.
walls were covered. I had displayed in the center. And
Well, you could have charged me $20 for today for sure. I would have definitely given you $20 for the entrance to your museum for sure.
this is the field officer's desk. This is what a field officer would have when he went into the field.
Oh, so he carried it like a suitcase and then he just folded it out to write on, or?
Yeah, and you write on this part right here, and then you keep all your stuff in the drawers.
Very neat.
Maps. These are all maps of the period.
Guys, I bet, see, this is like a half day. We could pull out these maps and just look at these maps. Unbelievable.
And then this right here would be a chest. This is a period piece from the 1860s. And you know, that'd be what your clothing would go on.
Right.
Robert E. Lee had a contingent of probably 200 men that traveled with him everywhere he went. and a couple of wagons, and they carried his tent and then all this stuff that they carried with him.
So there were slaves back then too. So he had probably a few slaves with him, or no slaves?
He had two African Americans that traveled with him, but they were free.
Okay.
They were not slaves.
So that's what the South wanted anyway, to free the slaves, or explain that a little bit.
The North, everybody's under the impression that they went to war to free the slaves.
Right.
There was no intentions of freeing the slaves. In fact, the people up north said, we don't want the people freed, because if they're free, they'll come up here and they'll work for 50 cents a day and take our jobs where we're making $1 a day.
Correct.
So we don't want those people up here. So
they were already unionized back then, and we didn't even know it, right? So that was kind of you don't understand about the unions today. Like they don't want somebody who will work for cheaper. We want to keep their wages as high. So it's just a little history from somebody who believes in something different, for sure.
The war itself was over money, and I'll tell you real briefly what that is. On December 31st, 1860, 80% of all the money coming into the federal treasury was coming from the southern states in the form of tariffs. Goods that were being brought into the southern states, they had to pay a tariff on. And 80% of the money coming into the federal treasury was coming from those tariffs of the South.
Right.
When the South left, obviously they weren't going to pay the tariffs. So Mr. Lincoln looks at it and he says, if we used to get $100,000 from the southern states, now we're only going to get 20,000, and we can't continue to operate. Our country will go belly up because we don't have enough money to function. So we've got to find a way to force the southern states back into the Union so that we can keep the revenue coming in. And so it's a long story, but it's all documented that the North told the South that they were not going to reinforce Fort Sumter, and yet at the same time that they were telling the South that they were not going to reinforce it, on April 8th, April 9th in 1861, they were sending ships out into the harbor to go to Fort Sumter to reinforce it. And when the ships got there, the South said, you lied to us, and you're down here to reinforce Fort Sumter, and so we're going to fire on you. Well, once the South fired on the North said, oh, look, they fired on us. Now we've got to go to war, okay? It was all planned. It was just one of those things that was all planned to do. We'll go to war, we'll whip them, we'll force them back in the Union, and then we'll get our money all over again.
Right. So guys, I want to speak on that for a minute. I can come back and totally get a different interview about what's currently going on with our world, right? So this is a person who's a historian who could give us exactly what's going on with our president currently. He'll give you his opinion about how history might be repeating itself through different tariffs and stuff that's going on through multi-country stuff, right? So I'll come back and we'll ask him about what he thinks about what's currently going on with our government today. And that'll be a whole different interview and a whole different day. But I want to hear an opinion of a historian about what's going on currently and how we could have probably prevented all this through just going back into history and knowing what already happened. So that's just like, this has already been 20 minutes and he's just starting. So I'm blessed. Jeremy's blessed to have gotten this history lesson today. So I'm going to wrap it up at this, and we'll be back because I definitely want to get a further interview, and I've got probably a list of questions that I can create for this great gentleman. So I'll see you guys.